Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say, "How dull it is around here without any children of our own. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses are so noisy and happy."
Yes, if we only had a baby, even if he were no bigger than my thumb. Oh, how happy I would be.
Now it happened that after a while the woman did have a child, and though he was perfect in every other way, he was no bigger than your thumb. The parents were very pleased, and the wife said,
He is just what we wished for, and we love him very much.
And they named him after his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of good food, he grew no bigger, but remained the same size as when he was born. He was a very smart boy, and was very quick and prudent, so that all that he did was successful. One day, as the father prepared to go into the forest to cut wood, he said aloud to himself, "If only there was someone to bring the cart for me."
"Oh, Father, I can bring the cart to you. Just let me try, and I will show you."
"Ha ha ha! How will you manage that? You are much too little to even hold the reins."
"That has nothing to do with it, Father. After you leave, Mother can lift me up, and I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go."
"Well, we will try it for once." When the time came to bring the cart to his father, Tom asked his mother to put him in the horse's ear, and he drove off crying,
"Giddy up! Giddy up!"
So the horse went on, quite as if the master were driving him, and drew the cart along the right road to the wood. Now it happened just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out,
"Giddy up! Giddy up!"
that two strangers passed by. "Look, now that is an odd sight. There goes a wagon, and you can hear the driver calling to the horse, but he is nowhere to be seen."
Yes, that is odd. Why don't we follow the wagon and find out more about this?
The wagon went right through the forest, up to the place where the wood had been cut.
"Hello, Father. Here I am with the wagon. Now take me down."
The father held the horse with his left hand, and lowered his little son with his right hand, and set him down on a stump, where Tom sat, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were speechless with wonder. At last one of them whispered to the other,
"Look here, that little chap could make us a fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. Why don't we buy him?"
So they approached the woodcutter and said,
"Sell the little man to us. We will take good care of him."
"No, he is my son, and the apple of my eye. Not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom Thumb climbed up to his father's coattails, perched himself on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear,
"Father, take the money, and let me go with them. I will soon escape these foolish men and come back again."
So the father did as the boy asked, and the men gave him a large piece of money. Then they asked him where he would like to sit.
"Put me in the brim of your hat. There I can walk about and see the country, and there is no danger of falling off."
So they did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had said goodbye to his father, they set off. They traveled on until it was evening, and the little fellow asked to be set down a little while for a change, and after some disagreement, they consented. So the man took him down from his hat, and set him in a field by the roadside, and Tom ran away, and crept among the furrows until he found a mouse hole to hide in.
"Good night, gentlemen. Now you can just go home without me."
They ran up and felt about with sticks in the mouse hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept further and further in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of anger and with empty pockets. When they were safely gone, Tom crawled out of his underground hiding place and said to himself,
This is dangerous work, groping about mouse holes in the dark. A person can break his neck that way.
By good fortune he found an empty snail shell.
Now, here's a safe place to spend the night.
Before he had fallen asleep, 2 more strangers passed by, and Tom heard one of them say to the other,
Oh, that gold and silver that the rich parson has. How can we get our hands on it?
Yoo-hoo! I can tell you how.
What is this? I'm hearing voices in the dark.
Take me with you, and I will show you how to get the gold.
Who are you? Where are you?
Look down on the ground. Here I am.
You little elf. How can you help us?
I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you like.
I see, yes. Then come along with us, and we'll see what you can do.
So when they got to the parson's house, Tom Thumb crept into the room and cried out with all his might,
Shall I give you all the gold that is here?
Do speak quietly. You will wake the parson.
But Tom pretended not to hear them, and cried out again.
The gold! Do you want all this gold?
This time the maid, who was sleeping in the next room, was awakened, and sat up in her bed to listen. The thieves ran away in fear, but then they took courage again, thinking that Tom Thumb was just joking around. So they came back and whispered,
Be serious. Enough of your jokes, and hand us out some gold.
By all means. Just stretch out your hands, and I will give you all the gold you want.
This time the maid heard him clearly enough, and jumped out of bed and burst open the door. The thieves ran off, as if wild huntsmen were after them, but the maid, as she could see nothing in the dark, went to get a light. Meanwhile, Tom made his way out and went to the barn, and when she returned, she looked in every corner, but could find nothing. She went to bed at last, and thought to herself,
I must have been dreaming with my ears and eyes open.
So Tom Thumb crept among the hay, and found a comfortable place to sleep, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then go home to his father and mother. But in this world things seldom turn out the way we plan them. The maid got up at dawn to feed the cows. The first place she went to was the barn, where she grabbed an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. He slept so soundly that he was aware of nothing, and didn't wake up until he found himself in the mouth of a cow who had taken him up with the hay.
Oh no! How have I gotten myself into a mill?
But he soon realized where he was, and he had to be quick to avoid the cow's teeth, and at last he slid down into the cow's stomach.
The windows were forgotten when this little room was built, and the sunshine cannot get in. I do not think I should like to stay here long.
If his quarters were not unpleasant enough already, more hay was constantly coming in, and the small space was becoming more and more crowded. At last he cried out as loudly as he could.
Whoa! No more hay! No more hay for me!
The maid was milking the cow, and thought it strange to hear such a voice coming from a cow. And what was worse was that it seemed to her to be the very same voice that she had heard in the night. She got so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. Then she ran into the house crying,
Master, Master, the cow is speaking!
The cow must be mad.
And then he went to the barn himself to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again.
No more hay! No more hay for me!
Then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that an evil spirit had possessed the cow, and he ordered it killed immediately. So the cow was killed, and the stomach where Tom was cooped up was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom worked and worked, and he had just made a space big enough to get his head through when he met a new misfortune. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the stomach in one gulp. But Tom Thumb did not lose his courage and thought,
Perhaps the wolf will listen to reason. Dear Mr. Wolf, I can tell you where you can get a splendid meal, much better than this tripe.
Oh? And where would that be?
In a certain house, you can creep in while the people are asleep, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth, as much as you can eat.
and he went on to describe his father's house. The greedy wolf did not need to be told twice. He squeezed himself through a small opening that Tom had described to him, and he feasted to his heart's content. When he was finally satisfied, he wanted to leave, but he had eaten so much that he could no longer fit through the small opening. This was all according to Tom Thumb's plan, and he began to shout,
Mother! Father! I'm home! Over here! Father! Mother!
Will you be quiet? You will wake the folks up.
Help! Help!
but Tom ignored the wolf and continued to shout as loud as he could.
Help! Help! Mother! Father! Help! Help!
At last his parents woke up, and they ran to the door of the room and peeped through a small hole. And when they saw the wolf, they ran and got weapons, the father an axe, and the mother a large knife.
You stay behind me, and when I have struck him with the axe, if he is not quite dead, you finish him with the knife.
Help! Help! Father! I am in the wolf's stomach! Help! Help!
Thank heaven, we have found our dear son.
And then he told his wife not to use a knife, for fear of hurting Tom. Then he struck the wolf with such a blow on the head that the wolf fell down dead, and the wife used a pair of scissors to cut open the wolf's stomach and let the little fellow out.
Oh, how worried we have been.
I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air and see you again.
And where have you been all this time?
I have been in a mouse hole, and in a snail shell, a cow's stomach, and a wolf's inside. And now I think I will stay at home.
And we will never part with you again for all the money in the world.
And then they gave him something to eat and drink, and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were worn out with his travels. The end. The Riddle. A king's son once had a great desire to travel through the world, so he started off, taking no one with him but one trusty servant. One day he came to a great forest, and as evening drew on and he could find no shelter, he could not think where to spend the night. All of a sudden he saw a girl going toward a little house, and as he drew near, he saw that she was both young and pretty. He spoke to her and said,
Dear child, could I spend the night in this house?
Oh, yes. You can if you like, but I should not advise you to do so. I really think you had better not go in.
Well, for heaven's sake, why not?
My stepmother deals in black magic, and she's not friendly to strangers.
The prince guessed easily he had come to a witch's house, but it was now dark, and he could go no further. Moreover, he was not afraid, and he stepped in with his groom. An old woman sat in an armchair near the fire, and as they entered, she turned her red eyes on them.
Good evening.
She muttered, pretending to be friendly.
Won't you sit down?
She blew up the fire, on which she was cooking something in a little pot. But her daughter had warned the travelers to be careful not to eat or drink anything, as the old woman's brews were likely to be dangerous. They went to bed and slept soundly till morning. When they were ready to start, and the king's son had already mounted his horse, the old woman said,
Wait a minute. I must give you a stirrup cup.
While she went to fetch it, the king's son rode off, and the groom, who had waited to tighten his saddle girths, was alone when the witch returned.
Take that to your master.
But as she spoke, the glass cracked, and the poison spurted over the horse. It was so powerful, the poor creature sank down dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened, and then, not wishing to lose the saddle as well as the horse, he went back to fetch it. When he reached the spot, he saw a raven had perched on the carcass and was pecking at it.
Who knows whether we shall get anything better to eat today?
Said the man, and he shot the raven and carried it off. Then they rode on all day through the forest without coming to the end. At nightfall they reached an inn. The servant made the landlord a present of the raven. Now as it happened, this inn was the resort of a band of robbers, and the old witch, too, was in the habit of frequenting it. As soon as it was dark, 12 thieves arrived, and with full intentions of killing and robbing the strangers. However, they sat down first to the table, where the landlord and the old witch joined them, and they all ate some broth in which the flesh of the raven had been boiled. They had hardly taken a couple of spoonfuls when they all fell down dead, for the poison had passed from the horse to the raven, and so forth into the broth. There was no one left belonging to the house but the landlord's daughter, who was a good, well-meaning girl, and had taken no part in all the evil doings. She opened all the doors, and showed the strangers the treasures the robbers had gathered together. The prince bade her keep them all for herself, as he wanted none of them, and so he rode on with his servant. After traveling about for some time, they reached a town, where lived a lovely but arrogant princess. She had announced that anyone who asked her a riddle, which she was unable to guess, should be her husband. But should she guess it, he must forfeit his head. She claimed 3 days in which to think over the riddles, but she was so clever, she invariably guessed them in a much shorter time. 9 suitors had already lost their lives when the king's son arrived, and dazzled by her beauty, determined to risk his life. He came before her and propounded his riddle.
I say, here's my riddle. What is that slew none, yet killed 12?
She could not think of what it was. She thought, and looked through all her books of riddles and puzzles. She found nothing to help her, and could not guess. In fact, she was at her wit's end. As she could think of no way to guess the riddle, she ordered her maid to steal at night into the prince's bedroom and listen. She thought he might talk aloud in his dreams and so betray the secret. But the clever servant had taken his master's place, and when the maid came, he tore off the cloak she had wrapped about herself and chased her off. On the second night, the princess sent her lady-in-waiting, hoping she might succeed better. But the servant took away her mantle and chased her away as well. On the third night, the king's son thought he really might feel safe, so he went to bed. But in the middle of the night, the princess came herself, wrapped in a misty gray mantle, and sat down near him. When she thought he was fast asleep, she spoke to him, hoping he would answer in the midst of his dreams, as many people do. But he was wide awake all the time, and heard and understood everything very well. Then she asked,
One slew none. What is that?
and he answered, "A raven which fed on the carcass of a poisoned horse." She went on,
And yet killed 12? What is that?
"Those are 12 robbers who ate the raven and died of it." As soon as she knew the riddle, she tried to slip away, but he held her mantle so tightly she was obliged to leave it behind. Next morning, the princess announced she had guessed the riddle and sent for the 12 judges, before whom she declared it. But the young man begged to be heard. Then he said, "She came by night to question me. Otherwise she never would have guessed it." The judges said, "Bring us some proof." So the servant brought out the 3 cloaks. When the judges saw the gray one, which the princess was in the habit of wearing, they said,
Let it be embroidered with gold and silver. It shall be your wedding mantle.
The end. The Maiden's Visit. There was once a poor servant maid, who was very cleanly and industrious. She swept down the house every day, and put the sweepings on a great heap by the door. One morning, before she began her work, she found a letter, and as she could not read, she laid her broom in the corner, and took the letter to her master and mistress, to see what it was about. And it was an invitation from the elves, who wished the maid to come and stand godmother to one of their children. The maid did not know what to do, and as she was told that no one ought to refuse the elves anything, she made up her mind to go. So there came 3 little elves, who conducted her into the middle of a high mountain, where the little people lived. Here everything was of a very small size, but more fine and elegant than can be told. The mother of the child lay in a bed made of ebony, studded with pearls. The counterpane was embroidered with gold, the cradle was of ivory, and the bathing tub of gold. So the maid stood godmother, and was then for going home. But the elves begged her to stay at least 3 more days with them, and so she consented, and spent the time with mirth and jollity, and the elves seemed very fond of her. At last, when she was ready to go away, they filled her pockets full of gold, and led her back again out of the mountain. When she got back to the house, she was going to begin working again, and took her broom in her hand. It was still standing in the corner where she had left it, and she began to sweep. Then came up some strangers, and asked her who she was, and what she was doing. And she found that instead of 3 days, she had been 7 years with the elves in the mountain, and that during that time her master and mistress had died. The end. The Wedding of Widow Fox. There was once an old fox with 9 tails, who wished to put his wife's affection to proof. He pretended to be dead, and stretched himself under the bench quite stiff, and never moved a joint, on which Mrs. Fox retired to her room and locked herself in, while her maid the cat stayed by the kitchen fire and attended to the cooking. When it became known that the old fox was dead, some suitors prepared to come forward, and presently the maid heard someone knocking at the house door. She went and opened it, and there was a young fox, who said, "What is she doing, Miss Cat? Is she sleeping or waking, or what is she at?" The cat answered,
I'm not asleep. I am quite wide awake. Perhaps you would know what I'm going to make. I'm melting some butter and warming some beer. Will it please you sit down and partake of my cheer?
"Thank you, miss. What is Mrs. Fox doing?" The maid answered,
She is sitting upstairs in her grief, and her eyes with her weeping are sore. From her sorrow she gets no relief. Now poor Mr. Old Fox is no more.
"But just tell her, miss, that a young fox has come to woo her."
Very well, young master.
Up went the cat, pit-a-pat, pit-a-pat. She knocks at the door, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat.
Mrs. Fox, are you there?
Oh, yes, pussy dear.
There's a suitor below. Shall I tell him to go?
But what is he like? Has he 9 beautiful tails like dear Mr. Fox?
Oh, no. He has only 1.
Then I won't have him.
So the cat went downstairs and sent the suitor away. Soon there was another knock at the door. It was another fox came to woo. He had 2 tails, but he met with no better success than the first. Then there arrived more foxes one after another, each with 1 more tail than the last. But they were all dismissed, until there came one with 9 tails like old Mr. Fox. When the widow heard that, she cried full of joy to the cat,
Now open door and window wide and turn old Mr. Fox outside.
But before they could do so, up jumped old Mr. Fox from under the bench, and cudgeled the whole pack, driving them with Mrs. Fox out of the house. The end.